Hello and welcome to How I Teach with Replit. This is my name is Scott. This is a series of videos from CodeTrain, designed to supplement our resources package and our PD. We have a complete set of lesson plans and fully coded examples and teaching activities that you can use with your students. So if you're interested, please check us out at codetray.in. All right, in this video, we are going to be covering how I use and when do I use Replit, how I use Replit Teams for Education, which is the website I have up in front of you right now, and how I create new projects and share them with the students. Kind of give you a feel for the workflow of our projects. So the way that I use Replit in my classes is very early on, but I actually do start for the first 5 or 6 classes of my intro programming not in Replit. I actually use the p5.js editor, which if you've never seen is on p5js.org or p5.js will often take you there. And so this is the editor that they use, and I'm gonna make reference to this again in a few minutes. But essentially, what happens is we start to work in p5.js editor just because it's very simple. Students don't need to have any kind of complex login system. They just get going and they can get coding right away on day one. And so I use that for about 4 or 5 classes, and you'll see that if you are to look at our lesson plan package, that we start to use lessons where I give you sort of there's a couple startup lines I do a little bit differently when I'm working with Replit. You don't actually have to do it this way. You can do it the same way as the P5 editors, but I do kind of show you in our lesson plan examples sort of the differences. And so that's sort of how and when I start to use it after about 5 classes, and then I use it throughout all my courses after that. So for all my JavaScript p5.js stuff, and for all my Java lessons, for everything after about those first 5 or 6 lessons, I use Replit in some way or another. So I thought I'd start by kind of showing you sort of the overall workflow that I use with my students, and then we'll get into the specifics of how I set things up and how things actually work. All right, so firstly, I use the Teams for Education product from Replit. At one point in time, this was a paid product. Now it is completely free. I assume it'll still be for the long term. It is a nice classroom management system, so it allows you to kind of create projects that students can then directly access, and then you can access their code in read-write, and you can kind of control some of the things. If you are interested in using some auto marking capabilities, it's involved in that too. So it is actually quite a good product. I've been very happy with. The way that I kind of use it, you'll see in a few minutes, is I'm going to show you how to create a team for your classes, and then how I use the projects. But essentially the idea is I have sort of one version within Teams that the students are working on that I can see and edit and access, and then I also create a sort of a parallel version that I directly teach with. So for example, this is my Google Classroom. I've got a link in here that I provide to students called Cooper's Examples Replits, and that essentially is for students to look at, say, if they miss a class or they want to come back and review something they didn't quite get up to speed. But the idea is that I will be direct teaching them this project. What you're seeing right now is something a little bit towards the end of a unit, and if they were to click on that link through Google Classroom, they come to a read-only version of this, so they can use that to look over if they miss a class or what have you. And I directly teach in front of them, project this up on the board, and they use their Teams product, which I'm going to again show you in just a couple minutes how that works, to code along with me. And then again, students that are away can come back and check. The other thing I sometimes do is, or often do actually, is I don't necessarily want them to type every single line of every bit of code, so I'll often take chunks of my code live and paste it into the stream so they can quickly copy and paste, because this version of mine that they can link to does not necessarily update quite as quickly as you like. So I'll also ask them if they make a mistake. They'll say, "Mr. Cooper, can you paste in the current version?" And I'll just copy either some or significant amounts of what I am currently doing, or even the whole file if it helps, into the stream. They can quickly get it, so they don't feel like they're constantly behind or trying to troubleshoot problems and things like that. So it's kind of a really nice workflow for the students, and how it works. So that's sort of the generally way that I teach. Is I have a series of examples, which I'll explain a little bit more a little bit later on, that we work through in one project for a unit, and then we add new examples together in classes, and they also do their assignments in the same project. Again, I'm going to show you that and how that's set up in just a couple of minutes. So that's the general idea of how things flow. Okay, Where I am now is inside the Replit Teams product. I'm not going to show you how to specifically log in for sort of create an account for Teams for education because I'm sure that'll evolve as things progress. But it is a relatively painless and it is again a free product. Just so you can see on the left side is where kind of how you navigate yourself around. So this is where I have my Replits, and again most of these Replits you're going to see are actual my live coding examples I do with my students, which again I'll demonstrate that process in a little bit. And then you can see there is a Teams link, and so Teams will take you to your link of all your teams. So these are actually all of the classes that I'm actually using with my students. The more recent ones are my active classes, but I also keep my most recent ones from last year available to myself for my own reference. And of course, you can archive teams once you stop using them, things like that. So that's the process. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to actually set up a team and then how I actually use it. So I'm going to say create a new team. And I'm simply going to call this 2023 CodeTrain. And maybe I'll call it PD example team. So the idea is, of course, it does say you have to create a unique name, so you can't generate new names. You have to generate a new name each time, so I use the years and a few other things as part of that. And I'm going to hit my create team. Team username. So he wants to give the same username as that, so I will just say CodeTrain 2023 CodeTrain. Usually I just get the exact same name up. Forgot about that. I'll just make it a little faster. Now, once you've got that team set up, you need to be able to add your members, add your students. And so the plan is, or the way I usually do it, is a couple different ways. Usually the first time, if students have never used Replit before, what I'll have them do is first of all, go and create an account. We're a Google school, so they can just use their Gmail, their school Google accounts. That's the best thing. There are other ways to log in. I'll leave that for you to figure out with your own classes. But essentially, once they've created an account, this becomes a really painless process. Usually I go to this manage team members, and there is a generate a team invite link. And so I just do that. You can also bring in stuff through Google Classroom. You can generate CSV files from other things. I just usually ignore all that. I just give them this link, share it in the Google Classroom, and they will automatically be done. They'll automatically join. And so what then happens is when they go to Teams, they will see this. And then once they see that, they'll see the projects on the inside, which again, I'm going to show you about that in a minute. So again, that idea is you go to Teams, you generate a new team. You do that once for your entire class, for your entire year, and then that class will always be part of that team. And then manage team members will give you the ability to create a link that you can send them, and then they are just automatically in. I usually get them to join that team, join Replit first if they're new to Replit. Before I send them that link, it just makes that process just a little bit more smooth. And so now we're ready to create a project. So if you've used Replit before, creating a project within Teams is the exact same process. It's just where and how it shares out to people is different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Create Project. And what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to create a p5.js project. Now, quite often when I do this, I actually use older files. So I'll say create HTML, CSS, and JS. And then I'll give it a title based on whatever unit we're doing. So I'll just say Unit 1. And I'll just call it CodeTrain for now, just to make it differentiate from my other stuff. CodeTrain. Now, then I usually leave the rest of this blank, and you'll see why in a few minutes. There is the ability to create group projects, so if at some point in time you want to specifically allow students to create groups, you can, as part of the process, I'm not going to show you that in this video, but as part of that process, you can generate groups automatically, randomly. You can allow them to join and form their own groups if they want. There's lots of different things you can do, so it can be a pretty cool little feature as well. So I'm just going to click Create. Now, what this will do is it will create a blank HTML file with a script.js and a style.js. Now, I want to go back actually one step and show you a slightly different project, because there is an option to also create a p5.js template, which I usually don't, because what I end up doing is taking old code and firing it into this and dragging from previous classes projects that I've already started. I kind of got my setup already, right? So I've got these files here that I can kind of copy over and delete the ones I don't want. Because you're in this Teams product, there's a few extra files here, this config and a few other things that I don't generally use. I kind of ignore, but that will always start off when you're in when you're in that Replit. Now I'm going to back up a step, and I also want to show you what it looks like for the if you were to create a p5.js template in Replit. So I'm going to pause and back up one step. Okay, so now I'm back at that Teams page, and if I scroll down, you can now see there's my 2023 CodeTrain PD examples. And if I click in that, you will then see that there is a, oops, there we go. There is a Unit 1 CodeTrain, which I showed you a couple minutes ago. Now, one of the things to point out here is there's this published button, and then there's a view submission. So I haven't published this, so the students will not see this. It will not come up in their projects until after I publish. So that's when it allows you to do a little bit of work, get things ready to go, and then you hit publish. There's different workflows that different teachers use. Some teachers like to create a new Replit for every single assignment, every single activity they do. I actually don't. I end up creating a single Replit for an entire unit, and I have my examples and my students' assignments built into that, and I'll show you that in just a few minutes. But I wanted to show you another thing, how to create a second project. Oh, but before I do, once they're in Teams, in your team, this project will start to appear. So the first time they access it, only after you publish it, this will say start project for them. And then once they say start project, it'll say continue project or something like that. So they'll see each of these that you have. So let me create a second one, because again, I just wanted to demonstrate you that they do have under here, if you scroll down, they actually have a bunch of templates, and one of the templates is a P5 template. If I can't find it really quickly, I will search p5.js. It usually comes up right at the top for me. Sorry, I was less prepared for that, so bear with me a second. I'll pause. Sorry about that. There is a very long list of templates they included. Unfortunately, they're not in any kind of alphabetical order or sorted order, so I didn't want to have to search for them in front of you. So now I've selected p5.js. I'm going to say unit 2, unit 1. Why don't I just call it unit 2, just because why not? Unit 2, CodeTrain. And again, I'll just hit create. And what you will see here is that it does give you the start code for p5.js project. Now I do it a little bit differently, and the one thing I'm going to suggest to start off with is in index.html. This is where you're going to see, I'm going to close this web view, otherwise it's going to be really distracting. This is the line of code that has the link to the P5, the current P5 library. I would actually recommend that before you start this, you always go back to the P5.js editor, and you can expand and go to its HTML, and make sure you've got the most recent version. So here, for example, it says the most recent version is 1.6.0, whereas this one here is 1.4.1. So I would highly recommend, if you're going to use their built-in templates, to go back and just copy over the top of that one line so you know it's a little bit more up to date. So that is sort of the basics. Now what I am going to do though is pause and now show you how I actually do things a little bit differently. I'm going to show you one of my actual starting projects for a unit, and then I'll explain how I got there and what I think you should have in, because I always like to include some images. I always like to include some starter code. I also include something called a template. So bear with me a second. I'm gonna set this up and show you how to do this. All right. What I'm looking at right now is my starting project for my second programming unit of my intro course. So this is an introductory course, but it's well into the year, about halfway through the year. And so they've already completed a full unit of introductory P5.js, focusing mostly on images and variable usage and things like that. And so this unit focuses, more on Boolean logic and if statements and things like that. And this is the project that I give them at the start. So what I've done is I've set this up already, and this is what I then publish. So this is what they would access as a starting point. So I want to show you sort of the starting standard things and what I do a little bit differently. So the first thing I do is I usually give my index.html, a background style color is just a little bit different than white. You can pick whatever you want. I'm just going to maybe try light blue here, and rerun it. So, and the only reason I do that is it does make sure then that it doesn't have the basic white behind their canvas. Because if you have the basic white, it's sometimes hard to realize if there's an error or where the error is. So if you see the light blue behind, then you know that they've at least got the program running properly, and something's wrong with their p5.js. Because if they don't see the light blue, then they know the HTML is not even running. So it kind of helps you troubleshoot that a little bit. Plus, it can make it look a little bit better. Then I've got that same script line I showed you that a minute ago that we've created. I'm going to here is some Google font lines that I'll ask you to look at our fonts and images video to see how that works a little bit later on. And then I have a series of examples, but before I do that, I sometimes will add a little bit of information about. So here I've added a little bit of information about some of the Boolean operators that I do, and this is just sort of my flow. I think it makes things work a little bit better. I've actually created a div called my canvas, and you're going to see that in my code a lot. You don't have to do that. You don't have to have these extra divs. You can go straight and it'll draw right on the website itself. But it's just something I do, which then affects how the setup function in p5.js works. So I'll leave it to you to look at my other videos and see what I mean by that, but I will kind of point that out to you. So this is the starting point. What I have also included in this particular project is a folder which I just created, and I have loaded a bunch of images. So these are the images that I know I'm going to use in my either examples or in some of the earlier assignments that I want them to be able to follow along quickly without having to find a whole bunch of these images. So the idea is that these are preloaded and now they're useful. You can see I've got a subfolder of dice in the images folder. I also have a resource, you can ignore that. This one, because this is unit 2, what I often will do is I'll provide some of the core examples with them in a subfolder that we don't actually run, but that they can actually quickly access. So if they're trying to remember how to do something like a font or an image or a particular little interesting project that we did, it also keeps it super handy for them. So this is not really necessary at all, but I do that for my intro course sometimes. I also will sometimes do that at the beginning of my year 2 course. I'll grab a couple things from my year 1 and kind of just say, hey, remember that example from last time? Let's go run it and have a look at it. And maybe the first day we'll even review by tweaking it a little bit and kind of reminding you of some things. And then, and this is obviously entirely optional, I actually create parts of 4 examples that I'm going to do in the first couple of days of the lesson. And so each one of these is some starter code. So here is EX1, which is the one that's currently running. I'll show you that in just a couple minutes. And so you'll see here is the 2 lines of code that are a little bit different for the way I do things, because I created that my canvas div in index.html. So that's how you kind of reference it there. And then you've got your code here that you can kind of have something to start with students and say, hey, I just want to remind you of something. Let's tweak this. And so I think usually what I'll do on this first one is I'll do something about the image, and maybe I'll get the image to float back and forth and wrap around the screen. Things we've done already. Then I have a couple other more extensive examples that, again, I decided because I know I'm going to do those examples earlier in the unit that I might as well provide them as start code. Other times I'll just copy and paste start code into the Google Stream in a Google Classroom, so that they can just quickly copy and paste it into the starter lesson and go from there. But for this particular one, I've got several of these examples in. And then finally, and this is like super useful, is I created what I call a template.js. So this is where whenever I say, okay, everybody, I want you to create a new example completely from scratch, or if we're going to do a new assignment completely from scratch, they can go and copy from this template file. So it includes the preload function, which is often used for images. There's your setup and your standard draw function. I also include the key press function because we use that a lot with some sample code. So again, and maybe you want to give this, maybe you don't, but that way they can quickly copy and paste. Oh yeah, if I want to use a P key, it uses this kind of syntax. If I want to use an arrow, it uses this, or there's a couple different ways to do it, but different kind of syntax. And then the mouse press one with the printing the mouse X, mouse Y line is really useful to have handy for them all the time, because if they're going to be drawing and things like that, they can copy and paste space, mouse pressed in, and then they click, and in the console it would give them that information. So it's really a really handy thing. So I always give them, for every one of my classes, a template file. I always give them likely at least one or two kind of examples early on the units I know for sure I'm going to do. And then I also give them an images folder again to kind of help them set up. So this is what they get. Okay, this is what they get. And then I publish. So once I'm ready to go, I publish. And so once I publish, I'll go back to that team. This particular team is my current, this is my actual live class, computer science 10 class, it's a full year class. And so you can see that I have published in across this thing 1, 2, 3, 3 units, an opening, introductory programming, a second programming. Those are using Alberta Education naming, just so you know, structured programming 1. A third are web design, and then plus a couple of one-off projects that we just do one thing. This is a biographies of famous computing scientists that they do, and this is an exam. So sometimes I do separate exam projects, etc. And so this is, right now you're seeing this at about 3/4 of the way through the year, and with my 3 major programming units. And my 4th one to come is my is our end of year project, which I will likely create a whole new project for them. So that is sort of how it looks. Now, if I click on view submissions, you will see all of their names. Okay, now I'm not going to do that right now because I don't want you to see all their names. Again, that's once you published. But what I will show you then is what it looks like once I'm in. So I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to skip past showing you all my students' names and then jump into a sample student, which is actually my other username, just to show you what it looks like from a student's perspective. Alright, so I'm about to show you what it looks like from the student perspective. This is, again, still at the main Teams page. The one thing that I did want to point out is from now on, whenever the students have started working on something, so you can see I've got 30 students started on this particular project. This link here, the students will never see again. So this is the project that I just showed you a minute ago. That is the starting point of the project. So even if I was to edit this right now, once they have started the project, they will not be able to see those changes. So I'm going to show you in a few minutes how I create a parallel project. What they're going to see is the starting point and move on. So this is the link to one of my students. In fact, it's me, but a sample student. So I've clicked on, it's actually from this one, view submissions. You end up seeing a full list of all your classes, and then there's a button, view Replit or something like that, and it takes you to here. And so what you will see is you have the actual full edit privileges to all of their work. So that allows you to run things, to mark things, to make suggestions, to do what have you. So you have full edit access, and this is exactly what they see. So you are seeing their project. In fact, sometimes, depending on the type of project, you might even be able to, if they're doing this in class, you can actually jump on live with them in class. They can see you type, and sometimes you can even see each other run the projects as well. So it can be a nice thing. If you have a student that asks a quick question, you think it's just quick and it's not worth getting up out of your seat, or maybe you're just feeling a little lazy like I do sometimes on a Friday afternoon, I could just jump into their project and say, well, which file are you working on? Oh, you're working on assignment 4. Let me go pull up assignment 4. Oh, I see. Here's your error. Maybe I highlight it. Maybe I make, if it's a really simple change, oh, you missed the semicolon. Or maybe I'll leave a little comment and say, oh, you forgot to initialize this variable here. And then they see if they can do it live. So you can actually, it's a live shareable doc between you and that student. And they are not able to easily share the code. Now, of course, code is copy and pastable. We all know that. But within a Teams product, they can't directly create a second copy to share, or they can't share this directly with their student. Again, we all know that students can get around that. That's a topic for another video. Okay, so the last thing we need to talk about though is I've got this project ready to go. My students now have access to this project and they can start going, but I want to teach them the products and I want them to be able to work, and I want them to be able to access my code. So the last step at the time of this video is actually a little bit clunky. It doesn't quite work the way that I'm hoping they develop a smoother process. And that is, I need to create a copy of this project in my own personal replets that I can share a read-only copy with their students. So again, by what I mean by that is if I go back to here and I click on, let's say, this project, I'll do the one I showed you guys a couple minutes ago, Structured Programming 2, my Unit 2 programming unit. If I make a change to this, the students do not access that. They can't see that ever. So I have to create a copy of this that I will do with them, and then I share the link to that public project through Google Classroom. And unfortunately, there's no, at the point of the time of recording this video, there's no like really smooth process to do it, but yet it's super important. So I'm going to show you that process right now. Right now, the only way to do it is to create a parallel project and add all the code one way or another. If I'm only going to add, no images, one or two files, no big deal. I could have them open in separate tabs, copy them from here, paste them into the new one. But instead, what I want to do is I've got images, I've got these other files, I've got 4 or 5 files. I do not want to copy all of them. So here's the process. Again, definitely a little bit clunky. I'm hoping they can improve this in the future. There is a way through this ... button to download this project as a zip folder. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to download that as a zip folder. Now, I'm working on a Windows machine, so this is going to download somewhere, and then once I'm there, I'm just going to go and extract it in the background, and then I'm going to come back and show you what I'm going to do next. Okay, so I'm on a Windows computer, so I've had to extract my files. So now I've got this full folder named exactly the same way as what that Replit project was. And so what I'm going to need to do in a minute is to grab all of the relevant files. So I'm going to grab template.js, index.js, my 4 ex.js examples. I'm going to grab my folder. I'm using control-click in my case, and my resources. So anything else like cache and config and nix and replit, you don't need to worry about any of that. Those will be there if you need them anyway. So those are the files that I'm going to need. So I'm just going to pull those off the screen for a second, come back to that in just a minute. But I'll have that there ready and handy. Then what I do is I simply go to my Replit. So I'm going to go to my Replits, and what you'll see is I have a lot of Replits because I would create a new one for this. So I'm going to create a Replit. Actually, maybe I have one already. Did I create one already for this? No, I didn't. So I'm going to create a Replit. Again, it's got to be HTML, but I don't need to say p5.js no matter what I'm doing. So I'm just going to say CodeTrain example, because I'll delete this a little bit later on anyway, and I create this Replit. It defaults to public, so the good news is once I create this, have this link, I can put that into the Google Stream or in the Google Classroom in some way, share it with my students, and then they have access to my read-only files. So now, here I am. I've got these extra files I don't need, so usually right away I'll just sort of delete script.js, delete. I'll delete style.cs, delete. I usually leave config or any other files alone just because I don't want to mess anything up. Now I'm going to pull my Windows Media folder over here again where I've got everything selected already, and I click and drag those files into here, making sure I don't accidentally drop it in that config folder. And it takes a couple of minutes, or not even a couple of minutes, but it takes a minute or two. Eventually it's going to say, do you want to replace, because I'm replacing index.html. And we'll give it a sec to pop that up, and then as soon as it does, we will then have a new project that is exactly the same as my starting. There we go. Yes, you want to overwrite this file, and I'll give that a second to do that, and then I should be able to hit run, and it will look exactly the same way as my other one. And so now I've got an example. So the only trick is, and this is a bit of a trick, is I have to do this for if I have more than one section of the same class. I want to create a separate one for each class, right? So I'll create CodeTrain example, block 1, CodeTrain example, block 2, and then I would have that. I have to do the same thing, the same process as well if I want to create a starting project in a different team. So I'm going to have a block 1 team, and I'm going to have a block 2 team for my classes. And so again, I still have to have this exact same upload, which can be, like I said, hopefully they fix this flow, because I have now have to do this 3 times, right? Where I've got to make my original one for one of my teams, for one of my classes. Then I make sure it's all up to speed and get it exactly the way I want it, proofread it, double check it, make sure you're right. Then I download it as a zip, create 2 different versions in my personal files, but also repeat that process within the second class's team by creating their new project there, so I can then publish that for my students. And so that's generally the flow. The last thing I want to show you then is how do I get students to switch between files, because I've got several files here. So the process that we use in my classes, and the very first time students see it, they get a little bit confused, but it really is quickly, is I use the idea of control slashes and commenting out multiple files. So right now I'm running ex1 welcome.js. If I click in that and control slash, and then I click in the next one, ex2 dice, and control slash, this one might error on me, right? Because I was playing around with some things. So let me go and make sure it just is ex2 dice. And I run that, and now it'll run ex2 dice. There's not much here. That's deliberate because I haven't given them much of a file. And then what we do is we'd say, okay, we're done with that one. I'm going to copy that one, paste, control slash that one out, control slash this one in, and do ex3 sun moon. And run that one. And so what they do is they then end up having a series of examples here, and often I'll get them to separate their assignments. So I always tell them to call their assignments AS1, AS2, AS3, and then they can flip back and forth. And this is the way I do it. So I will have one project for the entire unit, And all they do is they control slash in the particular JavaScript file they want to run. I like it this way for a couple of reasons. One, it keeps all of their examples handy with their assignments so they can quickly go back and check things and see how things are going. It also allows me as a marker to potentially access assignments and quickly flip back and forth between different things, or mark multiple projects all at once if a student's been away for a few days. I just find it to be a nice, better workflow. It's not the only way. In fact, there is another teacher in my school that often will create more often than just once a unit. She'll create multiple projects, and so each of those, almost every assignment, she'll add a new project and do it that way. If you're doing something like Java, where your solutions are really clear cut, then it's probably better off to do a new Replit Teams project for every single assignment, because then you can use the auto grading. But because my philosophy in computing science is creativity, almost every one of my assignments are unique anyway, so there's no advantage to auto grading, and you can't auto grade creative artistic work. So and so that's sort of the flow. So I think that's about everything. I'm just going to pause the video and double check, make sure there's nothing I've overlooked, and then I'll kind of give one quick summary, and then we'll be done. Okay, we are basically finished. I just wanted to review a couple little things for you as teachers. That was a lot of stuff. I know you can rewind, and I'm sure you will at various points of time. But I am in the Teams project right now. Again, Teams is a free product, at least at the time of video. I imagine it will be for the future. That I end up creating a different team for each one of my classes. So here you can, there's my computer science 20s, my grade 11 classes. I have two different sections. So I've named one block day 1 block 1 and day 1 block 4. And within each of those, then I have a series of projects. So here you can see that I generally create one project per unit. So here is my CS20 APs. This is my group that does the CS Principles course. Again, this is after they've already had 1 year. So we do a project on essentially focusing on functions. We do a project exceptionally focusing on arrays. We do object-oriented programming as a unit that's not part of CSP, but I do with my students. And then I have them do their great big project, usually game design using their object-oriented programming concepts. And then in my particular class, once we've finished off the CS Principles material, we start a Java unit that they continue in their grade 12 year, their final year. So that's sort of the workflow. Once you've created that Teams project, it is crucial that you publish it so that the students then have access. Once they have access, they can you'll see them. So once they have access, you go to manage team members, either that or before. Oops, I'm gonna close that up. Got some names in there, and you'll have the link, and then they'll be able to access, and then you can click on view submissions and access their projects directly. And again, because though I teach in front, I've also created parallel parallel projects in my own Replit, and I've demonstrated how I upload all those things at the beginning. What you'll find in our resources is those starting projects that I use are described in detail at the beginning of every unit, and I would encourage you to pay attention to some of those details if you're going to follow our lesson plans closely. Those startup projects will help you a lot. Thanks everybody from CodeTrain. Hopefully that helps for those of you that have not been part of our CodeTrain PD in the past, or not used our resources in the past, and you're just here to learn about Replit. Hope you've enjoyed the video, but we would encourage you to check out what we offer outside of this video series. So thanks everybody. Have a great day.